I want to dig into kind of the advice for, we talked about the younger audience and the younger demographic, but those who are looking to, follow in your footsteps, follow in my footsteps, like get into this industry. What is something that you wish you kind of knew when you were in their shoes? And we talked about your journey earlier, but like, what do you wish that you know now you could have known back then?
I honestly think I would say probably maybe not an answer you're expecting, but probably more on the perspective side. I think like it's so important to be invested and to care about your job and to do good work. But there are a lot more important things than your job and doing good work. And I think obviously to get there, especially, back when we started and got into this, I was like, I want to do everything. I want to take every opportunity. I want to prove that I deserve to be here and I should be here. And maybe overworked myself to a degree or signed on to do things that I probably shouldn't have done. And ultimately, I don't regret any of that, but I just think you know you can do this in a degree to kind of give yourself balance and prioritize yourself and your own mental health and your family and your friends and the things that are important to you outside of work because at the end of the day I hate to say this but like anyone in a job is replaceable or things can happen but you can't get back that time or those that sort of stuff. So I think that is important. I also think just like the value of relationship building is probably what I would say is the most important thing in this industry. I always say this to prospective students and things like that. You think there are a lot of different sports teams and you think this and that, but like the industry in itself is pretty small. And there's probably someone at most teams or organizations that I can be somewhat familiar with or feel comfortable reaching out to. Or so just making sure, you never know what's going to happen, but it's not never a bad idea to have a conversation or to kind of build those relationships. And then obviously, keep up those relationships. And, it's a pretty small industry. So reputation is important in a lot of ways, but
Sure.
just working hard and being eager and all that is definitely important.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I mean it's a job and it's a great job, and I honestly have no idea what else I would be doing, but it's just part of who you are. It's not the entirety of who you are. So making sure you have those boundaries, and everyone talks about, mental health and being burnt out and work-life balance. Well, a lot of that, you have to fight for it in some regard, but you have to do it for yourself too, right? Like if you don't have work to do in an evening, but you go home just to get ahead and you want to continue to work, like you have to find those ways to break apart and separate yourself. And like on vacation, trying to like delete some of my social apps just because it's almost like a habit of, oh, I have 5 seconds to sit here. I'm going to look at what someone's tweeting about baseball or free agents, and it's like you have to find your own way to just like remove yourself from work and be your whole person.
Totally. I mean, it takes a great degree of like fortitude to do that. It's not an easy thing, and I think it's easier said than done. And I think something I thought about a lot in recent years was just like identity. And it used to always be like, oh, like my friend Miss, this is Missy. She works for the Phillies, or this is Missy. She does this. And I feel like even like my parents, at parties and things would say it. And I'm like, okay, but who am I outside of that? I was like, there's just
Right.
so many things that I am that's not. This is Missy. She does social media for the Phillies, and obviously to your point, it is in many ways like a cool thing to talk about or tell people. And obviously people know sports and can relate to that or that sort of fandom, but it is so important to like have priorities and hobbies and things you like to do outside of work because it's so easy to get sucked into the hole that like everything is revolving around this because social never stops and sports never stops. But definitely important, and I think you'll ultimately probably drive yourself crazy if you haven't already, if you don't kind of have those passions and that life outside of it.
For sure. Well, so in a position where you've hired people before, this is a big part of all of the messages that I get on, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it might be, of just like, what advice, how can I stand out, things like that. So it's from a hiring manager's perspective, and knowing that it's a cover letter, it's a resume, it's two pieces of paper that basically decide what you're doing with the rest of your life. How do you use those two pieces of paper to your advantage to get these opportunities and get your foot in the door?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think to that point, and again, I joke about my mom kind of asking every little question, but you just don't really know where an opportunity might come from or like what kind of conversation might lead to an opportunity. So I think if you're very passionate about something, it's funny, like when I was in college, it wasn't really a thing to like message people on LinkedIn or do this. And I will be the first to admit it. I may not be the best. I may not be the best at replying to all of these messages or getting, but there are certain, I'll talk to college classes, I'll do things like that. And I think the kids that come back and are eager to learn more, just have a conversation, are the ones that are consistently impress me because they're passionate about it. I think obviously there's opportunity at like a smaller level from where you're in college or whatever to kind of get involved on the sports side or try and run social, and I think that's always impressive to me too. It's maybe fresh out of school, but I helped run Florida's whatever, and just sort of taking advantage of those opportunities. Obviously when I speak to somebody, you can get a pretty good sense on to what their vibe is in a way, in terms of just like, obviously sports is fun, but are you just here because you like the Phillies? Are you just here because you're a Phillies fan? Because if so, you're not going to love this job. You're going to want to be passionate about the work itself and be passionate about the creativity and that, as opposed to just because you like watching Bryce Harper hit home runs. So definitely attitude and sort of eagerness, but that kind of feel, which I think is something that's really tough to quantify in two pieces of paper. And I think, why that sort of experience or previous conversations or, getting to that point where maybe you have an interview is something that is really important to kind of stake out in an interview.
For sure. Yeah, and honestly, like reaching out to anyone in the industry just to learn and connect and
Mm-hmm.
ask any questions that you might have. You never know. Like it could be some person who's reached out to you 2 years ago and you have a meaningful conversation about like, oh, this was a great conversation. I'll remember this person. Then you have a job where it's like, oh, I definitely remember this person because I talked to him a year ago. Like, let's interview him. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the most like simple process. And the thing that always gets forgotten when it comes to social media is like it's the connections. We have all of these platforms that we manage for a living, but like you can use them to your advantage. I mean, like that's what LinkedIn is for me. I think all of my other social platforms have fallen off a drastic cliff because I just don't have time to do anything. But LinkedIn is a place where it's like I can share stuff about the industry and talk about like stuff that I read and it's like the perfect group of people where it's like you learn so much back and forth from all these great people. It's like why not reach out? Why not talk to them? Because you never know how it could help down the road.
Totally. And yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't, just because there may not be a job open right now doesn't mean that there won't be in the future. And, making a good first impression and being personable and professional is obviously something that's important. But again, like I got my first internship via the financial advisor that was helping my parents budget building a new house, who knew somebody who worked at the Rays and blindly passed along my resume. They happened to have an opening, and then from there, my boss in Cleveland knew somebody who worked at the Rays. My boss in Philly knew, my boss in Cleveland. So
Yeah.
ultimately, then I kind of built, I guess a reputation or whatever for myself, and had that sort of where that led me to ultimately other goals. But the first one was totally a fluke. I mean, it was
Yeah.
completely, totally out of the blue. And look at me now. So
That's it.
definitely not being afraid to kind of have those conversations and take those chances.